The energy mix in Africa is a fascinating one. We have an abundance of natural resources available to us. The, the real challenge is whether we have the appetite to develop these resources in a sustainable and viable manner. So there's no shortage of hydroelectric power. If we look at what Grand Inga can do for the continent, it is quite spectacular. But it's always been around whether Grand Inga as a project, for example, would have sufficient off-takers, would have sufficient funding to develop in a region that has not always been politically stable as well. Similarly for geothermal in Kenya and Ethiopia as well. What that represents is a wonderful opportunity for developing renewable energy resources. And then, of course, in southern Africa with solar PV and concentrated solar, given the solar radiation available to us, is really a magnificent opportunity. The challenge, though, for a lot of African countries remains around its baseload supply. And historically we have turned to coal to use as the base for that, especially in South Africa. I still think that coal does remain a viable alternative for us. Certainly in the near term. I mean, with what we're doing with Medupi and Kusile, it's about 9.6 gigawatts of energy that should come online, let's say, by 2018. The challenge, though, is what happens after that, and whether Africa, or South Africa for that matter, is able to embrace a nuclear future. A lot of talk has been around nuclear energy in this country in particular, and maybe one or two other countries on the continent, such as Ghana and so on. Even Morocco was investigating at some stage. The challenge, though, is whether we are able to afford the capital costs associated with that. We know that the operational costs of a nuclear plant are much lower than a coal-fired power station, for example. However, the capital costs are substantially higher. And nowhere in the world at this point in time has a nuclear plant come in on budget and on time. And that represents a real challenge in a region that does not have expertise from a nuclear point of view. We can always look to the South Korean example of KEPCO, which is the Korean Electric Power Company, who actually developed a nuclear capability, but that was done over a period of 30 to 40 years. So this is not a short-term solution. So maybe what we should be rethinking is, at what time do we want to take nuclear on board as a viable solution for the country? Whether we've got the right skills, whether we've got the right appetite for it from a funding point of view. If consumers can barely afford an 8% increase in tariffs this year, what nuclear would do in terms of the tariff increase is actually not been calculated as yet, and no one has actually thought through that sensitivity. So from a South African and a regional perspective, I would expect that at least fossil fuels remain in that mix. The other opportunity that has largely been untapped has been the gas opportunity. And I think that represents the real future for us in the short to medium term, where the Mozambican gas finds can be used to fire open cycle or closed cycle gas turbines in South Africa, or the region for that matter. The issue is, of course, whether we can land the gas at a comparable price to other fossil fuels for that matter. And if we're able to get that right, and it's an infrastructural design equation at the end of the day, if we can get that right, I think we have a real future in gas-fired electricity in this region. So we are not strapped for choice. What we've got to do, though, is decide how we want to make the decisions around our energy future. And I don't think that we have thought through what specifically are those key sort of decision levers we want to pull in terms of that, because the energy policy is not clear in that manner. I know IRP 2010 talks about a fair amount of nuclear in the mix. However, the assumptions when IRP 2010 was created in South Africa have vastly changed since then. including what the energy demand would look like going forward as well.